So, debugging. Let's get on to our main topic then. Debugging, as a term, is the process of removing bugs from a program. We've already seen, last week, that there were a number of things where we can have errors. Bugs can be syntax errors where we get to make a mistake, maybe don't indent correctly or forget the colon at the end of a if statement. They can be runtime errors where the code it crashes as we run it. We've seen those happening. Or they may be bugs where it just doesn't do what you're expecting. And supposedly this word debugging originates from the 1940s when early programmers working on the very, very basic machines that they had then discovered a moth stuck in a relay. So they call that a bug, and they call the process of getting rid of these problems to make the program run debugging. Now, one way of debugging is just to read the program in and try and figure out where the error is occurring. And we've seen that with last week's examples where I showed you some errors. That's one way you can just look to see, does this function match this function? Or you can run the program as well. That would be another thing you could do and see what happens. It's fine for short programs, but imagine if you've got a really complicated one like Microsoft Word or a browser like Google Chrome. It's hundreds of thousands of lines of code. You're not going to be able to read all of that and make sense of it. So another way of debugging in the past, programmers would print out variables and values and status reports at various points to check everything was correct. That's still, it still happens quite a lot depending on the environment. Sometimes you don't have access to a debugger like this, but it can be quite cumbersome and slow. So the sort of modern way, up-to-date way of doing things is to use an IDE. When you can, use an IDE like PyCharm. You run the code, and then you force it to stop where you think something might be wrong. So it might be at a particular line of code. You might stop, something's going to go wrong at some point in the program. You stop just before that. Or maybe when a variable has a particular value, or just before a traceback error occurs. We've seen those tracebacks, when we've got something wrong in a program. So you run the program once, you see the traceback. It'll often tell you what the line number is where that's occurred, and you can stop it just before that. So the point is to stop the program before it goes wrong, and then examine the code at that point, examine the variables at that point, and see what the problem could be. And the key way of doing that is a technique called breakpoints. Key tool in our debugging toolbox is a breakpoint, which is an intentional stopping point within the program. So it's not part of the program. We can attach breakpoints to our program after we've written it and then stop it at any point. Usually we're going to attach a breakpoint to a line of code, and that means that when we're running the program, the execution of the code will pause at that line, or in fact just before that line is executed normally. But in most IDEs you can actually do breakpoints attached to variables, so they're triggered maybe when a particular value changes or a variable takes on a specific value. We're not going to do that technique for now, but it's quite a useful thing to be able to do. Usually you can do it with breakpoints. It's just when you've got very long, complicated programs that you need to start thinking about. I'd like this to run 100,000 times, but when it gets to a particular value, 100,001, then I'd like it to stop. Obviously, you don't want to do that. You don't want to have to stop it 100,000 times just at the same point. You'd tend to attach that to a variable. For our programs, for our small programs, stopping on a particular line of code is going to be sufficient. And how do you do that? Well, you just need to you click on the line number, just by the line number, and that will create this little red dot with a pink indicator on the line to show that there's a breakpoint there. So if I go to my code here, let's match that. If I click just to the right of this 9, it creates that dot, and I can put one there. And so what you see I've done there, I've gone into the two functions, so input, invert, and output. Let's maximize this. Okay, I've gone into two functions in this program, and I've put a breakpoint. So this will stop every time it gets into one of those functions, input and invert or output. Okay, So that's breakpoints. Let's see, I'll stop there, and then in a minute we'll see how we're going to use these.